Hi, my name is Annette Dawson. 6 months ago, I made a decision that cost me the people I thought I could never lose. My own family. I kept my grandmother's house, that's all. I didn't burn bridges, I didn't start a fight, I didn't take something that wasn't mine. I simply refused to sell the one place that had felt like home since I was a little girl. And in return, my name vanished from the family group chat. My birthday came and went without a single call. At Thanksgiving, there was an empty chair at the end of the table. My chair. And they didn't even pretend to wonder where I was. But here's the twist no one expected. This morning, I looked out my front window and saw them. My brother David and my sister Pauline, standing on my porch smiling like nothing had happened, asking if they could come inside. You might think I'm skipping a few steps here, and you're right. There's a story behind why I chose this house, why they wanted it gone, and how a front porch can feel like a courtroom where everyone is judging you without saying a word. But before I get to that, I need to tell you about the house itself, because it's not just a house. It's the reason I'm still standing. It sits at the end of Willow Street, where the pavement turns to gravel and the streetlights give up trying. 2 stories of weathered cedar siding, a crooked mailbox that still has my grandfather's handwriting on the inside flap, and a front door that creaks like it's telling you to think twice before you enter. The paint is faded, the roof has patches, and the garden, well, garden might be a generous word for the tangle of weeds and wildflowers out front, but it's mine, and more than that, it's ours. At least it used to be. When I was 6, my grandparents moved into this house after my grandfather retired from the mill. They didn't have much money, but they had time, and they poured it into making the place warm. Summer meant lemonade on the porch swing and the smell of fresh-cut grass. Winter meant hot cocoa in mismatched mugs and Grandpa teaching me how to play chess by the fireplace. It wasn't perfect, no place is, but it was steady. And in a family like mine, steady was rare. My parents argued more than they laughed. My brother and sister learned early how to take sides, usually the same one, leaving me to drift along the edges. But here, in this house, I was never on the outside. My grandmother's hands always smelled faintly of lavender soap. She'd hum while making biscuits, and without even looking up, she'd slide the first warm one onto my plate. "First taste for the first helper," she'd say. And I believed her. So when she passed away and the will named all 3 of us, me, David, and Pauline, as equal heirs, I thought we'd keep the place. I thought we'd take turns visiting, maybe even fix it up together. That was my first mistake. David saw numbers, not memories. "The market's good," he said. "We can sell it fast and split the profit. That'll help Pauline with her debt and give you a little cushion too, Annette." He always said my name like it was a reminder, as if I might forget who I was and wander off without his permission. Pauline didn't even pretend. "I can't afford to keep up some old shack," she told me over coffee one morning, "and you can't either. Be realistic." I tried to explain. I offered to buy out their shares. I even said they could store things here, visit whenever they liked. I thought that would be enough. But when money talks, nostalgia whispers. The day I signed the papers transferring their shares into my name, the group chat went silent. Not a single word. A week later, I found out from a neighbor that David and Pauline had been telling people I was holding the family hostage over a pile of rotting wood. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, not because I needed their approval. I'd learned long ago that was a losing game, but because, deep down, I thought maybe keeping the house would finally give us something to agree on. The first night alone here was strange. I could hear the wind in the eaves and the slow, steady tick of the old kitchen clock. I sat at the table with a mug of tea and thought about every birthday I'd celebrated in this dining room, every story my grandfather told about his years at the mill, every Sunday dinner where the biscuits came out first for me. And I promised myself I wouldn't let it go. Not for a quick payday, not for their approval, not for anything. But the thing about family, or at least my family, is that they don't just let you drift away. If you stop playing your part, they find ways to write you back in. Sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's public shame, and sometimes it's showing up at your door like they never left in the first place. Which brings me back to this morning. It was just past 9 when I saw them through the lace curtain. David in his pressed khakis, Pauline in a beige trench coat she probably bought secondhand but would never admit to. They stood close together, hands tucked into their pockets, faces arranged into polite smiles. I didn't open the door right away. I just stood there, watching them, the same way you might watch a pair of strangers who seem familiar but you can't quite place, except I knew exactly who they were. David leaned in toward the door and called out, "Annie, it's freezing out here. Let us in, will you?" Annie. He hadn't called me that since we were kids, since before I realized that nicknames from him usually meant he wanted something. Pauline chimed in, "We just want to talk." Maybe make things right. Make things right. That's what people say when they want to skip over the part where they admit what they've done. I stayed still, letting the quiet stretch between us. The wind rustled the dried hydrangeas by the porch steps. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice. And then softly, almost like she didn't want David to hear, Pauline said, "We don't have anywhere else to go." And just like that, I knew this wasn't about making things right. It never was. I stepped back from the door, my heart steady, my mind clear. The girl who used to open up at the first sign of a smile was gone. The woman who stood here now, in the house she fought for, the house she chose, knew better. And before I tell you what happened next, you need to know the whole story. Because if I've learned anything, it's that family drama doesn't start at the front porch. It starts long before, in all the little moments you thought didn't matter. Before you understand why I couldn't let go of this house, you have to understand the house I grew up in and the family that filled it. I was the youngest of 3. David, the oldest, was always the golden boy. Tall, confident, a natural talker. He could charm anyone, teachers, neighbors, even the cashier at the grocery store. If David wanted something, it was as good as his. My parents called him the future of the family. Pauline, the middle child, was different. Beautiful in a way that made people pause, always dressed just so, even if the money came from my mother's sewing machine and a stack of thrift store finds. She had a knack for getting out of trouble, sometimes by laughing, sometimes by crying, sometimes by making you believe it was your fault in the first place. And then there was me. I wasn't the loudest or the prettiest or the one with the big dreams everyone wanted to talk about. I was the one who cleaned up after dinner without being asked, the one who remembered to return library books before they were overdue, the one who did what was expected and got, in return, a polite nod or a half smile. It wasn't that my parents were cruel, at least not in the way you might picture cruelty. They didn't shout at me. They didn't call me names. They just forgot I was there. Not always. Not completely. But often enough that I learned to take scraps of attention and pretend they were enough. The first time I noticed the difference was on my 10th birthday. My grandmother, the one who later owned the Willow Street house, had baked me a chocolate cake with real buttercream frosting. She even let me lick the beaters, something she'd never allow David or Pauline to do because they might spoil their appetite. We were all gathered in the dining room when my parents walked in carrying a big wrapped box. My heart leapt. They'd never done that before for me. I tore the paper off to find a set of school uniforms. My mother smiled. "You'll need these when you start at the new school next year. We thought we'd get ahead." I remember looking at David's face, the smirk that said he knew exactly what had just happened. He'd gotten a new bike for his 10th birthday. Pauline had gotten a stereo. I got regulation skirts and blouses in a dull shade of gray. That was when I started going to my grandparents' house more often. Grandma never forgot my birthday. She never forgot that I didn't like raisins and cookies, or that I hated the sound of balloons popping, or that my favorite book was the one with the little girl who built a castle out of cardboard boxes. Grandpa was quieter, but he had a way of making me feel like I mattered. He'd sit with me on the porch swing, his arm draped across the back, and tell me stories about the mill, the people he worked with, the pranks they pulled, the pride he took in a job well done. "It's not about being noticed, Annie," he'd say. "It's about knowing you did your part." When I was 16, I started helping them on weekends, mowing the lawn, repainting the trim, fixing the squeaky door hinges. Not because they asked, but because I wanted to. It felt like tending to something worth keeping. David and Pauline rarely came around unless there was a holiday or a reason to show off. Pauline once brought a boyfriend to Christmas dinner just to make sure everyone saw the necklace he'd given her. David came for Thanksgiving one year, ate 2 plates of food, and left early to meet friends. Friends we all knew were at the bar downtown. When Grandpa passed away, things shifted. Grandma stayed in the house, but she grew quieter. I still came by every weekend, sometimes bringing her groceries, sometimes just sitting in the kitchen drinking tea. David and Pauline called now and then, but I noticed something. When they talked to her, they always steered the conversation toward money. Was she keeping up with the bills? Had she thought about downsizing? Grandma would smile politely and change the subject. By the time she passed, I think we all knew there would be tension over the will. She'd left the house to all 3 of us equally. A gesture of fairness she probably thought would keep the peace. But fair on paper doesn't mean fair in real life. We met at the lawyer's office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and the faint scent of Pauline's perfume. The lawyer read the will, and before the last word was out of his mouth, David was leaning back in his chair, saying, "Well, we should list it right away. No point in dragging this out." I remember looking at him, at the easy way he dismissed the walls that had held our grandparents' laughter, the floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. "I don't want to sell," I said. Pauline's head snapped toward me. "Then buy us out. At market value. You can't expect us to just give you our share." "I will," I said, my voice steady. "It might take me some time, but I'll do it." David smirked. "What's the point? You can't take care of it. It'll just fall apart, and then you'll be stuck with something worth even less." I didn't answer. There was no point. They'd already decided what I could and couldn't do. A month later, I handed over the checks that transferred their shares into my name. The silence from them after that was almost impressive. Not a single call. Not a single message. Even the obligatory Merry Christmas text didn't come that year. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. I had the house. I had the memories. But silence can be heavy. It can fill a room until you can't breathe. And sometimes, even when you've walked away from people who hurt you, a part of you still wishes they'd follow. That wish died the day I found out what Pauline had posted online. It was a grainy video of the house, shot from the street. She'd angled the camera to make it look worse than it was, lingering on the chipped paint, the weeds, the recycling bin I hadn't brought in yet. The caption read, "My sister's living conditions break my heart. She deserves better. Please help me give her a fresh start." Underneath was a link to a fundraising page. The goal was $20,000. The recipient account was hers. People commented things like, "You're such a caring sister, and bless you for looking out for family." I stared at the screen, my coffee going cold in my hands. She hadn't asked me. She hadn't even told me. And she certainly hadn't given me a cent from the donations. That was when something in me shifted. The hurt was still there, but now it was laced with something sharper. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of clarity. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about the story they were telling. The one where I was a problem to be fixed, a charity case to make them look good. I wasn't going to play that role, not this time. And as I started saving screenshots and talking to someone who knew how to make it stop, I realized something else. They had no idea I was finally ready to fight back. The day it all came to a head was one of those early spring mornings that can't decide if they're going to be warm or cold. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the air smelled faintly of wet earth, and I was standing in the kitchen waiting for my tea kettle to whistle when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from my neighbor, Ruth. "Morning, Annette. You might want to see this. Don't shoot the messenger." Attached was a link to a live video on Pauline's social media page. I hesitated. I'd been trying to keep my distance from their world, the curated pictures, the carefully worded captions that made our family look closer than it was. But curiosity is a tricky thing. I tapped the link. The screen filled with Pauline's face, framed perfectly by loose waves of hair and a cream-colored scarf that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She was standing outside, and it took me half a second to realize she was standing outside my house. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Hey, friends. I'm here today because my heart is heavy. Behind me is the house where my sister's been living. It's not safe. The roof leaks, there's no proper heating, and, well, you can see for yourself." She stepped aside, angling the camera so it caught the worst of the peeling paint and the bent gutter that had been on my repair list since January. "She's too proud to ask for help," Pauline continued. "But I know my community is full of generous souls who care. If we can raise enough, maybe we can convince her to move somewhere better." The comments were pouring in so fast they scrolled like a slot machine. "Bless you for caring." "Donated $50. "You're an angel, Pauline?" My jaw clenched. I paused the video and set my phone down like it was something that might burn me if I held it too long. She wasn't just twisting the truth. She was building a whole stage out of it and selling tickets. I didn't call her. I didn't message. I just closed the blinds and sat at the kitchen table, my tea going cold. For years, I'd been the one to smooth things over, to let things go. If someone forgot me in the family photos, I laughed it off. If David took credit for something I'd done, I told myself it didn't matter. But this was different. It wasn't just about me. It was about my name, my dignity, my right to exist without being turned into a pity project. That night, I called Elsie. Elsie had been a friend since college, the kind of friend you don't have to explain yourself to. She was also a paralegal at a small law firm in town. I told her everything, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask me if I was sure. She just listened. When I was done, there was a pause. Then she said, "Annette, what they're doing could be considered misrepresentation or even civil exploitation, depending on how the funds are handled. If you want to stop it, you can, but you have to be willing to document everything." "I am," I said without hesitation. "Good. Start taking screenshots of every post, every comment, every donation tally. Save copies of the videos. Get timestamps. And don't confront them directly. Not yet." The next few days felt strange. I'd go about my usual routine, fixing the loose hinge on the back door, making soup, walking to the market. But in between, I was quietly building a case. My phone was full of screen recordings, folders labeled by date, backups saved on a flash drive. It was like tending to a garden, except instead of flowers, I was cultivating proof. Pauline kept posting updates. She claimed she'd raised over $12,000 in just a week. She posted photos of herself looking solemn in front of the house, captions like, "Every dollar brings us closer to a safer home for my sister." The comment section was a chorus of strangers praising her kindness. David wasn't as visible online, but Ruth told me she'd overheard him at the hardware store telling someone I was mentally stuck and that Pauline was doing her a favor by stepping in. I filed that away too. One evening, just as the sun was dipping behind the hills, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct message from Elsie. "I've spoken to my boss. We can draft a cease and desist letter. But I have an idea, and it's up to you whether we use it." Her idea was simple, almost surgical. Serve the letter in the middle of one of Pauline's live streams. No drama on my end, no shouting, just a quiet, legal line in the sand delivered in real time in front of her audience. I sat with it for a day, The old version of me would have said no, would have worried about how it would look, whether it would make things worse. But I wasn't her anymore. "Let's do it," I told Elsie. Over the next week, we prepared. Elsie coordinated with a process server who agreed to deliver the envelope at a precise time. I kept gathering evidence. My pulse would race sometimes, thinking about what might happen, but under the nerves, there was a calm I hadn't felt in years. 2 nights before the delivery, I dreamt of my grandmother. She was standing on the porch of the Willow Street house, the porch swing swaying gently behind her. She didn't speak, just looked at me with that steady gaze that always seemed to say, "You know what's right. Do it." When I woke, the decision felt even clearer. On the morning of the planned delivery, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the window open just enough to let in the scent of blooming lilacs from the yard. My phone was propped up, the live notification already active. Pauline is live now. She was in her usual spot, perfectly lit, perfectly framed, telling her viewers how much their donations meant. "We're almost at our goal," she said, her smile warm enough to melt butter. "Just imagine the new beginning this could be for Annette." At minute 7, the process server stepped into frame. He wore a dark jacket, a neutral expression, and held a large manila envelope. "For you, ma'am," he said. Pauline blinked, the smile freezing just enough for anyone watching closely to notice. "Oh, thank you," she murmured, her eyes flicking to the camera. She slid a hand under the flap, pulled out the letter, and started reading. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked back up, glanced at the server, then at the comments flooding the screen. And then, with a quick, brittle laugh, she said, "Looks like we've got some legal stuff to deal with, folks. I'll update you soon." The live stream ended abruptly. I closed my laptop and sat back, my heart steady. No yelling, no gloating, just a line drawn once and for all. That night, I walked through the house, touching the worn banister, the kitchen counter where my grandmother had rolled out biscuit dough, the window seat where I used to read on rainy days. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like mine. And as I climbed the stairs to bed, I thought, this is just the beginning. The morning after the live stream cut short, my phone lit up before I'd even made my coffee. At first, I thought it was the usual. Weather alerts, store coupons, maybe Ruth texting about the neighborhood cat again. But it wasn't. It was notifications. Hundreds of them. My name was suddenly everywhere, in comments, in group chats, in screenshots, flying across Facebook and Instagram like wind-blown papers. What happened on Pauline's live? She looked spooked. Did you see her face? That wasn't nothing. Cease and desist. Somebody's in trouble. I hadn't said a word publicly, but speculation was already running wild. People had clipped the exact moment the process server walked into her shot, replaying it in slow motion like it was a scene from a crime drama. Someone even added dramatic music. By noon, the hashtags had started. Pauline cut off, and let her on live. Not your charity. I stayed offline, though it wasn't easy. There's a strange pull to watching your own name swirl around in the mouths of strangers, but I knew better. Elsie had warned me, the less you say now, the stronger your position later. So I kept quiet, letting the tide carry itself. That afternoon, Ruth knocked on my door, a paper bag of fresh rolls in her hands. "Brought you these," she said, pushing past me into the kitchen like she'd done it 100 times. "Also, I think you should know, Pauline was at the cafe this morning. She didn't look happy." "What did she say?" I asked, tearing off a piece of bread. "She told Marcy, loud enough for the whole place to hear, that you're overreacting and that you made her look bad in front of her supporters." Ruth raised her eyebrows, like she needed any help with that. I almost smiled. It was the kind of thing Pauline had done my whole life. Try to frame herself as the victim before anyone else could see the full picture. That evening, Elsie called. "She's losing control of the story," she said, sounding both professional and faintly amused. "That's good for us, but there's more." She forwarded me an email from the Skyline Estates HOA, the homeowners association for the neighborhood Pauline lived in, not me. Apparently, they'd seen her fundraising under their community's name, claiming she was assisting a displaced homeowner from the area. They wanted confirmation. Attached were copies of her applications for emergency community aid, citing me as the recipient in need. "She used your name and address," Elsie said. "That crosses into fraud territory. The HOA is opening a formal review, and they'd like your cooperation." I read through the document slowly. She'd framed it just right. Enough truth to seem believable. Yes, I owned an old house. Yes, it needed work, but bent until the meaning was unrecognizable. To her, my life was a backdrop for her performance. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small reading something like that. I felt anchored. They could call me stubborn, cold, ungrateful. But I knew the truth, and now other people were starting to see it too. The next few days, the online chatter turned into something bigger. People dug into the fundraiser's payment details, finding the same PayPal account linked to Pauline's wellness retreat business. Others noticed the photos she'd used on the page had been lifted from my private Facebook years earlier, without permission. And then came the shift. The comments under her posts weren't just praise anymore. They were questions, sharp ones. "Where's the money going? Why is the account in your name if it's for Annette? Did she even agree to this?" Pauline started posting less, but when she did, the tone had changed. Defensiveness creeping into captions about staying positive and ignoring negativity. It was around then that I got the call from Aunt Miriam. We weren't close. She'd been my mother's younger sister, the fun aunt in my childhood, until a falling out with my parents over something I never fully understood. We hadn't spoken in years except for the occasional Christmas card, but her voice on the phone that night was warm, steady. "I saw what happened," she said, "and I just want you to know, you're not crazy. I've watched your brother and sister pull this same act in smaller ways for years. You just finally caught them where other people could see." Something in my chest loosened. It wasn't full forgiveness for all the silences and absences over the years, but it was a bridge. 2 days later, Pauline announced an in-person community event to clear the air. It was scheduled for the Marriott Grand Ballroom in the city, tickets free but RSVP required. Elsie texted me immediately. "If she's going public, this is our chance to be present, quietly. No fireworks, no shouting, just watch." I agreed. By then I'd come to understand that my power wasn't in meeting Pauline on her stage. It was in refusing to play along at all. The night of the event, I drove into the city in my old but polished navy dress, hair pinned back simply. I wore my grandmother's silver locket, the one Pauline once called flea market junk, like armor. The ballroom was packed. Influencers, local journalists, curious neighbors. Pauline moved through them like she'd been born for it, glowing under the lights, her laughter bright, her hands clasping strangers as if they were dear friends. If you didn't know better, you'd think she was untouchable. I stayed near the back, unnoticed. The opening speeches rolled by, thank yous to sponsors, vague words about family unity and healing journeys. Then came her slideshow. At first, it was all the expected fare, stock images of smiling children, thank you notes from families helped, photos of generic repair work that clearly wasn't my house. Then the screen flickered, and suddenly, up there, 20 feet wide for the whole room to see, was a text message. Her text, "Let her rot in that dump. I gave them the GoFundMe link for PR. Cry for me, baby." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Before anyone could recover, another slide. "She's good for sympathy points. Keep the cameras low, show the cracks." Phones went up instantly. The room was buzzing in whispers, shocked laughter, the clicking of camera shutters. Hashtags started popping up on the screens of those in the front row. I didn't know who had leaked them. Maybe one of her own contacts, maybe someone who'd had enough. But I didn't need to. The effect was immediate. Pauline froze. Her practiced smile faltered. Her hand tightened on the podium. She stammered something about a tech glitch, but no one was buying it. And then Aunt Miriam stood. She'd been scheduled to speak next. Her name was on the program. But the look on her face told me this wasn't going to be the speech Pauline had planned. She walked slowly to the stage, ignoring Pauline entirely. When she took the microphone, her voice carried without effort. "I was asked to speak tonight about hope," she began. "About rebuilding trust, about family." She paused, scanning the crowd. But here's the truth. For too long, this family has worn a mask in public while shaming in private, propping up one child while another is left to scrape by in silence. People shifted in their seats. Some put down their drinks. Some leaned in. "I won't pretend anymore," Miriam said. "Tonight I stand not with what looks pretty on a flyer, but with what is right." And then she stepped down, crossed the room, and without hesitation, wrapped me in a hug, the kind you feel in your bones. The room erupted, not for Pauline, but for us. Pauline left soon after, the train of her gown snagging on a chair as she passed. I didn't watch her go. I just stayed in that embrace a moment longer, the noise of the ballroom fading to something softer. For the first time in a long time, the silence I carried didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a choice. Morning light poured through the patched windows of the Willow Street house, settling in long golden rectangles across the floorboards. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air, listening to the creak of the old pipes and the low murmur of voices drifting in from outside. It was the sound of my neighbors, the Millers from down the road, their twin boys chalking bright drawings on the sidewalk. Laughter, unforced and light, wove its way in through the screen door. It had been 3 weeks since the Marriott ballroom, 3 weeks since Pauline's mask had slipped in front of flashing cameras and a crowd of people who'd once taken her every word as gospel. In that time, I'd seen headlines fade, hashtags slow, and the internet's attention drift towards some newer scandal. But here, in my little corner of the world, something else had happened. Life had gotten quieter and better. The first few days after the event were strange. I'd expected more. Angry calls from Pauline, sharp emails from David, maybe even some kind of public counterattack. But nothing came. No apology, no explanation, not even the usual passive-aggressive jabs through mutual relatives. It was as if they'd decided that pretending I didn't exist was safer than trying to fight a story that now had too many witnesses. I let them have their silence. For once, it worked in my favor. Instead of checking my phone for signs of incoming drama, I started making lists. Practical ones. Repairs. Replace the back door screen. Repaint the porch railings. Fix the bathroom leak. Garden. Clear the weeds. Plant the bulbs Ruth had given me in the fall. Kitchen. Finally install shelves for the canning jars that had been living in boxes for months. At first, the work was exhausting, the kind of tired that makes your bones ache by evening. But it was good tired, the kind that leaves you with something to show for it. Every fresh coat of paint, every stubborn root pulled from the soil felt like staking another claim on this house, not just in my name, but in my spirit. The neighborhood noticed. Mr. Alvarez from 2 streets over stopped by one Saturday with a spare trellis for the garden. "Figure you could use this for the beans," he said, setting it down like it was already mine. Kids began using my walkway as part of their chalk art circuit, leaving crooked suns and giant flowers that made me smile every time I stepped outside. One weekend, Ruth and I hosted a small cleanup day, just a few tables of lemonade and brownies, a folding chair for anyone who needed a rest. People came. They brought tools, traded gardening tips, and carried off bags of yard waste like it was a team sport. By the time the sun dipped low, the air was thick with the smell of cut grass and the sound of easy conversation. The house looked not perfect, but cared for, alive. That evening, I sat on the porch swing with a glass of iced tea, watching the last light fade from the sky. It struck me then how different this felt from the gatherings of my childhood. No one here was performing for approval, no one keeping score. These people didn't care that my porch paint was chipped or that my roof still needed work. They cared that I was here, part of the fabric of this street. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't bracing for the next insult or the quiet erasure. I was simply present. And then, just as I was settling into that peace, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look, but something, maybe habit, maybe curiosity, made me reach for it. A message from Pauline. "Hey, things have been rough. Any chance we could crash with you for a while? Just until we figure things out." No apology, no acknowledgement, just the casual assumption that after everything, I'd open my door without question. I stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the absurdity wash over me. This was the same woman who had filmed my home to make it look like a ruin, the same sister who had collected donations in my name and kept them, and now she wanted shelter. I set the phone down without replying. The next morning, I woke early, the air cool against my face. I wandered into the entryway and glanced at the wall above the coat rack, where a simple wooden frame hung. Inside was a faded photo of me at 8 years old, wearing a paper crown and glittery costume from a school play. In the background, blurred but unmistakable, was my Aunt Miriam, clapping like her life depended on it. Beneath the glass, in neat handwriting, were the words, "You always had the light. M." I touched the frame lightly, feeling the knot in my chest loosen. There was no anger left in that moment, just gratitude. I picked up my phone and typed the only response that felt true. "There's no space for lies here anymore. I wish you peace." Then I sent it. The days that followed were quiet again. Pauline didn't reply. David stayed invisible. And I went back to the small, steady work of living. By mid-May, the beans were climbing the trellis Mr. Alvarez had given me. The front steps were lined with mismatched pots of flowers, some from my own planting, some left anonymously by neighbors. The bathroom leak was fixed, the back door no longer stuck on humid afternoons, and the porch railings gleamed with fresh white paint. None of it made the house new exactly, but it made it mine in a way that no bank document ever could. One evening, Ruth and I sat out front watching the twins chase fireflies. "You look lighter these days," she said, sipping her lemonade. "I feel lighter," I admitted. "It's like I was carrying around this weight I thought was mine to bear. Turns out it wasn't." She nodded. "Funny thing about peace. It's heavy work to get there, but once you have it, you wonder why you ever settled for less." I thought about that for a long time after she left. On the last Sunday of the month, I baked biscuits. My grandmother's recipe, the one she used to hum through. As the scent filled the kitchen, I opened the back door and let the evening breeze in. Somewhere down the block, someone was grilling. Children's laughter rang out, mingled with the low murmur of adults talking in clusters. And there it was again. That sense of belonging I'd chased for so long in the wrong places. I'd spent years knocking on closed doors, trying to earn my place at a table where my chair was always at the far edge. Now I had my own table, and the people who gathered here didn't care how polished the silverware was. They cared about showing up, about sharing the meal. I know better than to think the past won't try to knock again. People like David and Pauline don't disappear. They circle. They wait. But I also know that I have boundaries now. Not walls, just firm lines drawn in the ground I work to make my own. And when I think of the girl I used to be, the one who would have opened her door to them without hesitation, who would have given away her last safe space just to keep the peace. I feel nothing but compassion for her. She didn't know she was allowed to choose herself. I do now. That's when I realized rebuilding isn't just about hammers and paint. It's about deciding who you let walk through the door when it's done. And this time, I'll choose carefully. It was late June when the knock came. Not the sharp, impatient pounding that made you brace for bad news. This was softer, almost hesitant. 3 quick taps, then silence. I was in the garden, my hands deep in the soil, pulling weeds from the bean patch. I heard it again and brushed the dirt from my palms before heading to the front door. Through the lace curtain, I saw them, David and Pauline. They looked different from the last time I'd seen them. David's khakis were wrinkled, his hair in need of a trim. Pauline's scarf was gone, replaced by a faded cardigan. No camera in sight, no glossy presentation. Just 2 people standing on my porch with the weight of something heavy between them. I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I stood there, hidden from their view, taking in the sight. My chest was steady, my mind sharper than it had ever been in moments like this. 6 months ago, just the idea of them standing there would have sent me scrambling, heart pounding, palms damp, ready to fold at the first hint of warmth. But that woman was gone. Finally, I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch. Pauline's voice was the first to break the silence. "Annette, we need to talk." The words hung in the air like damp laundry. She glanced at David, who gave a small nod. David cleared his throat. "We know things have been tense. We've made mistakes." He looked down, then back up, holding my gaze just long enough to make it feel like he'd practiced it in the mirror. "But we're family, and right now, we need you." There it was. Not an apology. Not really. Just the pivot, the setup to whatever favor was about to follow. I didn't say anything. I let them fill the silence. Pauline stepped closer, her hands twisting together. "Our lease is up next week. The business took a hit after everything. We don't have a place lined up yet. We thought maybe we could stay here, just for a little while, until we get back on our feet." I studied her face. She wasn't wearing makeup. Or maybe she was, but it was smudged in a way that didn't look planned. She looked tired. They both did. But tired doesn't erase the truth. "Why here?" I asked, my voice calm. "You've made it pretty clear what you think of this place." Pauline's mouth opened, then closed. David stepped in. "Because it's home," he said simply. The word hit a nerve. Not because it was true for them, but because I'd spent so many years trying to make it true for me in their presence. And when I finally did, they weren't here to see it. "You mean it's my home?" I said. David's jaw tightened. Pauline spoke again, her voice softer. "We can help. With repairs, with the garden, whatever you need. It's not like before. We've learned." I could hear the rehearsed sincerity, the edges smoothed over just enough to sound believable, but I'd spent a lifetime decoding their words. I knew when the subtext was survival, not reconciliation. In the old days, I might have caved. I'd have told myself that letting them in was the higher road, the bigger person choice. But the truth is, being the bigger person had been a muzzle they'd used on me for years. Now I understood something I hadn't before. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're doors you choose when to open. And sometimes the right choice is to keep them closed. "I'm glad you came," I said, surprising them both. Pauline's eyes flickered with hope. David straightened slightly. "I'm glad," I repeated, "because I needed to hear this. From you, I needed to hear that you only come to me when you need something. That way I don't have to keep wondering." Pauline's face fell. David's went blank, the way it always did when he was deciding whether to fight or retreat. "I can't give you what you're asking for," I continued. This house is my safe place. My life is here. And after what happened, after what you chose to do, I can't risk that peace." David opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. "Number, I'm not saying this to start a fight. I'm saying it because it's the truth." For a moment, none of us spoke. The sound of a lawn mower started up somewhere down the block. A bee buzzed lazily near the porch railing. Pauline's voice broke the quiet, smaller now. "So that's it? You're just done with us?" I met her eyes. "I'm done with the version of us where I have to disappear to keep you comfortable. I'm done with being the story you tell to make yourself look better. If there's another version, one built on honesty, not convenience, then maybe we can find it someday. But it doesn't start here, and it doesn't start now." David looked away first. Pauline swallowed hard, glanced at him, then back at me. "I guess we'll figure something else out," she said, her voice brittle. They turned to go, walking down the steps with a slowness that might have been regret, or just calculation for the next move. I stood there, watching until they rounded the corner. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt free. It wasn't about shutting them out forever. It was about choosing not to invite chaos back in before it had earned the right to return. That evening, I walked through the house, touching the surfaces they'd never bothered to see. The smooth banister I'd sanded and stained myself, the shelf I'd built from reclaimed wood, the faded rug that still held a trace of my grandmother's lavender sachet. Each thing was a piece of my life they'd dismissed, but here, in the quiet, they were proof of what I could build without their permission. I made tea and sat on the porch swing as the sun went down, the air cooling on my skin. Fireflies blinked in the garden. Somewhere inside, the kettle clicked off, and the house settled into its nighttime stillness. It occurred to me then that they might try again, maybe in months, maybe in years, and maybe by then something will have changed, but I'm not holding my breath. You can't put your life on pause waiting for someone else to become the person you need them to be, the person I needed them to be. I had to become for myself. And as the first stars appeared in the summer sky, I realized that was the quiet victory I'd been chasing all along. A month passed without another knock. July slid into August, the days stretching long and hot. The garden thrived, beans curling higher on the trellis, tomatoes ripening in the sun, marigolds nodding at the edges like they approved of all this slow, steady work. The house itself seemed to breathe easier. The new porch paint had settled into a soft eggshell sheen. The gutters were clear, the roof patched. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar from the boards I'd replaced in the back room. Every change, no matter how small, was a way of telling the house, "You're worth keeping." And maybe I was telling myself the same thing. On Saturday mornings, I'd walk to the farmer's market with Ruth. We'd bring back peaches and fresh bread, stopping to chat with neighbors who knew me as Annette from Willow Street. Not Annette, Pauline's sister. That was the difference. Out here, I wasn't someone's supporting character. I was the main story, even if it was a quiet one. One afternoon in late August, I found myself sorting through an old box in the attic. It was full of things my grandmother had tucked away. Recipe cards in her looping script, yellowed photographs, a chipped mug with "World's Best" helper painted on the side in a child's shaky handwriting. Mine, probably. At the bottom was a folded piece of paper, brittle with age. It was a clipping from the local paper, an article about the mill where my grandfather had worked. There was a quote from him near the end. "A home isn't where you hang your hat. It's where you keep your word." I sat on the attic floor, the heat pressing around me, and let the words sink in. They weren't about siding or floorboards or fresh paint. They were about choosing to live in a way that matched the promises you made. To yourself and to the people who'd earned your trust. It struck me that I'd been keeping my word, even if I hadn't said it out loud. I'd promised myself the day I signed those papers that I wouldn't let this house, or my peace, be taken from me, and I hadn't. By September, the air had turned crisp. I hosted a small dinner for the neighbors who'd helped with the cleanup earlier that year. We sat at the long table I'd refinished myself, mismatched chairs pulled in from every corner of the house. We ate roast chicken and fresh bread and peach cobbler, talking about gardens and the upcoming harvest festival. Someone brought up the idea of a community tool library, and before dessert was finished, we'd already made a plan. It was the kind of evening I used to dream about back when I thought family had to mean blood. Now I knew better. Family could be chosen, and sometimes it was stronger that way. The message from Pauline came in mid-October. It wasn't long, just 3 sentences. "We're doing better now. I know we hurt you. Maybe one day we can talk." I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and went outside to cut the last of the marigolds before the frost. I didn't reply that day, or the next. Not because I was angry, I wasn't, but because I'd learned that some doors aren't ready to be opened, and it's not my job to rush them. On the first truly cold morning of the year, I made biscuits. I stood in the kitchen with my hands in the dough, humming the way my grandmother used to. The smell filled the air, warm and familiar, carrying memories that no one could take or twist. When the biscuits came out of the oven, I set a plate on the table, poured myself coffee, and sat by the window. Outside, the frost glittered on the grass, the street quiet except for the sound of a single car passing by. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to get a seat at someone else's table, chasing approval that was always just out of reach. And I thought about this table, mine, and how anyone who sat here now would do so because they respected the space, not because they saw it as something to use. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering what will happen the next time they knock. Will I open the door? Will I stand on the porch and talk? Or will I let the knock fade into silence? I don't have the answer, and that's okay. Because the truth is, I'm not living for the next chapter in their story anymore. I'm writing mine. The Willow Street house was never meant to be perfect. The floors will always creak, the porch will always need touch-ups, and the garden will never be in perfect rows. But it's mine. It's the foundation I chose. And every time I walk through the front door, I'm reminded of something I learned the hard way. Sometimes the hardest walls to break through are the ones built by the people who were supposed to love us most. But once you stop knocking on closed doors and build your own, you don't just find freedom. You find yourself. A week later, I hung a small sign just inside the entryway. It wasn't fancy, just painted wood with 5 words in plain black letters. "This door opens by choice." It made me smile every time I saw it. Not because it was a warning, but because it was the truth. And if you'd told me a year ago that I'd find peace in the quiet of a creaky old house at the edge of town, without the approval, the applause, or the people I'd once called my family, I wouldn't have believed you. Now, I know better. Now I know that the life I was chasing wasn't out there, waiting for me to prove I deserved it. It was here, waiting for me to stop giving away the key. If you've ever had to choose peace over family, you know it's not an easy choice, but it's the one that lets you walk through a door, your door, and know, without a doubt, that you belong. This wasn't a story of resentment. It was a story of rising, without needing applause, of standing firm when others walked away. If you've ever felt overlooked, unwanted, or quietly erased, let Annette's journey remind you, you don't need anyone's permission to live your truth. You don't need approval to protect your home. And love, real love, doesn't ask for credit. It simply stays. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, you matter. And your love leaves a mark,